The battlefield was set. On one side, the army of Israel, led by Joshua, a man of unwavering faith, yet surrounded by uncertainty about what was to come. On the other, a powerful coalition of Amorite kings, well-armed armies, bloodthirsty warriors, determined to crush anyone who dared to challenge their reign. The sun had already begun to rise on the horizon, casting long shadows over the land that would soon be stained with the blood of war. The Israelites were outnumbered. They knew it. Every warrior could feel the tension in the air, the weight of responsibility pressing upon their shoulders. If they lost this battle, the promise of the promised land could become nothing more than a distant dream. The enemy was relentless. Their overwhelming force could wipe them off the map, reducing them to nothing but dust, carried away by the wind. And then, the impossible happened. In the heat of battle, when all seemed to be tipping toward defeat, something came from the sky. Not arrows, not spears, but something far more powerful and terrifying. Giant stones began to rain down, as if the heavens themselves were in a fury. The rocks fell with unimaginable force, striking the enemy armies, yet not a single Israelite was harmed. What could explain such a phenomenon? Was it mere coincidence, an unexpected storm, or was it the very hand of God reaching down from the heavens to fight for his people? The Bible tells us that on that day, more enemies fell under the hailstorm than by the swords of Israel's warriors. But that was not the only divine intervention. Something even more astonishing was about to take place. Joshua, with boldness and unshakable faith, would lift his voice to the heavens and command the very sun to stand still in the sky. But what does all of this mean? What does this story reveal about the power of God and his mysterious ways? Today, we will dive into this fascinating account. We will explore the battle, the divine intervention, and the signs that marked this event. But above all, we will seek to understand the great question behind this episode. What was God trying to teach us by fighting against a human army? Get ready for an epic journey into the mystery of the hailstorm. To understand this battle, we need to go back in time and look at the land where it all took place, Canaan. Canaan was not just any territory. It was the land that God had promised to Abraham centuries earlier. A promise reaffirmed to Isaac, Jacob, and finally, to the people of Israel. But this land was already inhabited by powerful nations, the Canaanites, Amorites, Jebusites, and many others. They not only lived there, but also followed spiritual practices that included human sacrifices and extreme idolatry. When God led Israel out of Egypt and into Canaan, it was not merely about territorial conquest. It was divine judgment against these nations and a calling for Israel to be a holy people, set apart for God. But the inhabitants of the land were not willing to give up their dominion. They would resist with all their might. That was when the Amorite kings realized the imminent threat. Israel had already defeated Jericho and Ai, two fortified cities. With each victory, their enemies' fear grew. And now one Canaanite city, Gibeon, had made a peace treaty with Israel. That was the final straw for the Amorites. They could not allow the Israelites to advance any further. So 5 powerful kings united for a single purpose, to destroy Israel before it was too late. But at the head of God's people stood a man who trusted in something far greater than military strategies. His name was Joshua. Joshua was not just a military leader, he was Moses' successor, chosen by God to lead Israel in the conquest of the Promised Land. From a young age, Joshua had demonstrated unwavering faith. He was one of the few who believed that God would grant Israel victory when spies were sent into Canaan years earlier. Now, as a commander, he carried not only a sword, but also a divine promise. Every place that the sole of your foot shall tread upon, I have given to you. Joshua 1:3. But this battle was not just physical, it was a test of faith. The Israelites faced a vast and ruthless enemy coalition. From a human perspective, the odds were against them. However, God had already spoken to Joshua before the battle even began. "Do not be afraid of them, for I have given them into your hands. Not one of them will be able to withstand you." Joshua 10:8. This promise was the strength that sustained Joshua. He did not retreat, he did not hesitate. If God had spoken, then victory was certain. This battle symbolized something far greater than the conquest of land. It was a reminder that faithfulness to God brings deliverance and that he fights for those who trust in him. But how would Joshua face this challenge? How would he lead his men into war against such overwhelming forces? The answer was about to be revealed, and it would begin with a cry for help. News spread quickly. The 5 Amorite kings were marching against Gibeon. For the Gibeonites, this meant imminent destruction. They had made a peace treaty with Israel, but now they faced the wrath of their former allies. Fear gripped the city. Their only hope was to call upon the one they had recognized as the servant of the true God, Joshua. Messengers rushed out, crossing hills and valleys until they reached Israel's camp at Gilgal. Breathless, they delivered their desperate plea. "Do not abandon your servants. Come quickly, save us. Help us, for all the Amorite kings from the hill country have joined forces against us." Joshua 10:6. Joshua did not hesitate. He could have seen the request as a political inconvenience. He could have left the Gibeonites to their fate. After all, they had secured the treaty through deception. But Joshua did not act out of convenience. He acted out of faithfulness, both to God and to his own word. He quickly gathered his warriors. Every man took up his sword and shield. There was no time to waste. But then, before the march, God spoke once again. "Do not be afraid of them, for I have given them into your hands. Not one of them will be able to withstand you." Joshua 10:8. That word changed everything. The war was decided before it even began. God would not only grant victory, he had already decreed it. But there was a great challenge. The enemy was far away, and any delay could be fatal. Normally, an army would take days to cover such a distance, but Joshua made a bold and unexpected decision. He and his men would march through the entire night to surprise the Amorites at dawn. Imagine the scene, hundreds of Israelite warriors walking in silence under the starry sky. Their armor reflected the pale light of the moon, and only the sound of determined footsteps broke the stillness of the night. It was an exhausting march. Sleep tried to overcome them. Fatigue weighed on their shoulders, but God's promise sustained them. They knew they were not marching alone. Meanwhile, in the enemy camp, the Amorites slept peacefully, confident in their numerical strength. To them, Israel would never dare to attack such a large army head-on. They were wrong. As the first light of day touched the horizon, Joshua and his army were already in position. They had marched all night and were now ready for battle. Then, with a mighty war cry, the Israelites charged. Panic seized the Amorites. They never expected such a sudden assault. The battlefield erupted into chaos, but that day still held something extraordinary. God was about to intervene in a way no army had ever witnessed before. The clash of swords echoed through the valley. War cries cut through the air. The Israelite army, though smaller, fought with courage and determination. The Amorites, caught off guard by the surprise attack, desperately tried to regroup. But fear had already spread through their ranks. The battle raged on. The sun rose higher in the sky, and the heat began to bear down on the warriors. The enemy was vast, and the fight was intense. For a moment it seemed that the Israelites might be overwhelmed by sheer numbers. But then something supernatural happened. Suddenly clouds began to gather in the sky. The wind shifted. A deep rumble echoed through the heavens, as if the very earth was about to break open. And then the first stones began to fall. These were no ordinary stones. They were massive boulders, descending from above, crushing the Amorite warriors with devastating force. Rocks rained down from the sky as if they were projectiles launched by God himself. Panic turned to terror. The Amorites tried to flee, but there was nowhere to run. The stones struck their targets with deadly precision. Curiously, not a single Israelite warrior was struck. The hailstorm seemed to have a precise target: the enemy army. The Bible describes this moment with a striking statement. As they fled before Israel on the road down from Beth-horon to Azekah, the Lord hurled large hailstones down on them from the sky, and more of them died from the hail than were killed by the swords of the Israelites. Joshua 10:11. This was no ordinary storm. It was a direct intervention from God in the battle. But why did he choose to intervene in this way? What was the meaning behind this rain of stones? And even more astonishing, the supernatural events of that day were not over yet. Something even more incredible was about to happen. The enemy army was in complete disarray. The hailstorm had utterly shattered their formation. Their ranks were reduced to chaos, cries of terror, fallen warriors, and soldiers fleeing in every direction. It was clear that this battle was not just between human armies. God himself was fighting for Israel. But Joshua knew there was still work to be done. Though the hailstorm had decimated much of the enemy force, many Amorite warriors remained. They were retreating, desperately trying to escape the divine judgment raining down from the heavens. If night fell, they could have a chance to regroup and strike back. Complete victory was not yet secured. Then Joshua did something that would go down in history as one of the boldest acts of faith ever recorded. He lifted his eyes to the sky and spoke a command that seemed impossible. "Sun, stand still over Gibeon, and you, moon, over the valley of Aijalon." Joshua 10:12. And the impossible happened. The daylight did not fade. The sun remained fixed in the sky, as if time itself had stopped. The moon did not continue on its course. For hours, the day continued as if it were endless, giving Israel enough time to completely destroy their enemies. The Bible describes this event with awe-inspiring words. The sun stopped in the middle of the sky and delayed going down about a full day. There has never been a day like it before or since, a day when the Lord listened to a human being. Surely the Lord was fighting for Israel. Joshua 10:13-14. How did this happen? Science has tried to explain this event in various ways: an optical illusion, an atmospheric phenomenon, or even a symbolic account. But the central point is not how it happened, but why it happened. God intervened supernaturally to show that he was in complete control of the battle. He did not just fight alongside Israel, he stopped the heavens themselves to secure victory. This event was not merely a military miracle. It was an eternal message for all who trust in the Lord. When God decides to fight for his people, no force in the universe can stand against him. The sun remained motionless in the sky. Time seemed frozen, and the battle raged on under the light of a day that refused to end. What had begun as an uneven confrontation had transformed into a living testimony of God's power. But this story was not just about stones falling from the sky or the destruction of an army. It was about a bold prayer that defied the very laws of nature. Joshua, in the heat of battle, realized something crucial. Time was running out. The remaining enemies still had enough strength to escape, and if night fell, they could regroup and strike again. Victory would not be complete, but what could he do? No military strategy could extend the day. No warrior could prevent the sun from setting. Then Joshua did something unthinkable. He did not ask for reinforcements. He did not request more soldiers. He asked God for something humanly impossible: to make the sun stand still in the sky. "Sun, stand still over Gibeon, and you, moon, over the valley of Aijalon." Joshua 10:12. At that moment, something happened that would never be repeated in history. The sun obeyed the voice of a man. The moon did not move. God answered Joshua's prayer. The Bible declares in awe, there has never been a day like it before or since, a day when the Lord listened to a human being. Surely the Lord was fighting for Israel. Joshua 10:14. This passage raises many questions. How was it possible? Was it a natural phenomenon, a literal miracle? Some theories suggest that God slowed the Earth's rotation, while others propose it was an optical phenomenon. But in the end, the exact explanation matters far less than the lesson this event teaches us. Joshua did not hesitate to ask for the impossible. He did not calculate probabilities or confine God to the known laws of physics. He simply asked, and God answered. How often do we hesitate to pray boldly because we think something is too big for God? How many times do we give up calling on Him because the solution seems too far away? Joshua shows us that the prayer of a righteous person can change the course of history. The day lasted as long as necessary for total victory. The enemies were completely defeated, and Israel saw with their own eyes that it was not their strength that made them victorious, but the mighty hand of God. And what about you? Are you willing to pray with such boldness? Joshua's battle against the Amorites was not just a historical event. It was a testimony of God's power and an eternal lesson on faith, obedience, and bold prayer. But what can this story teach us today? How do we apply this kind of faith to our daily lives? The first and most evident lesson is that God fights the battles of those who trust in Him. The Israelites were at a disadvantage, but God had already declared their victory before the first strike was made. How often do we feel surrounded by overwhelming problems? Just as Joshua faced a vast enemy army, we also face daily battles, struggles against fear, doubt, anxiety, and life's hardships. God has not changed. The same God who sent hailstones from the sky to defeat Israel's enemies still fights for those who put their trust in Him. This means that we are never alone in our struggles. Another crucial lesson from this story is the power of bold prayer. Joshua did not pray timidly. He did not simply ask for strength to fight. He commanded the sun to stand still in the sky. Who, in their right mind, would make such a request? Joshua did, because he knew the God he served. He knew that the Lord was greater than the laws of physics, greater than time, greater than any obstacle. And what about us? Do we have the courage to pray with such boldness? Or do we limit our prayers to what seems possible? The Bible reminds us, ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, the one who seeks finds, and to the one who knocks, the door will be opened. Matthew 7:7-8. If God was able to stop the sun to answer the prayer of a faithful servant, what could He not do for those who cry out in faith? But there is one more great lesson in this event, one that is directly connected to the world we live in today. Beyond bold prayer and the certainty that God fights for us, this story teaches us a third fundamental lesson. God acts at the right time. Joshua wanted the sun to stop because he knew the victory had to be complete. If the day ended, the enemies could escape and the battle would drag on even longer. He did not want just a partial victory. He wanted God's purpose to be fulfilled entirely. How many times in our lives do we feel that time is working against us, that opportunities are slipping away, that we won't be able to overcome our challenges before nightfall comes upon our lives? God is never late. He knows exactly when to intervene and when to make us wait. Maybe you are facing a battle right now, praying for God to change a difficult situation. Maybe you feel like time is running out. But remember, the same God who held the sun in the sky for Joshua can also hold the timing of your life, open doors at the perfect moment, and ensure that no blessing escapes you. But here is another important question. Does God still fight for us today? The answer is yes. But now, the battles are not just physical. We live in a spiritual war. The Bible warns us, for our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Ephesians 6:12. Our greatest battles are not against people, but against fear, doubt, unbelief, and the spiritual forces that try to pull us away from God. And just as He did for Joshua, God still fights for us. but we must do our part. We must trust, act, and pray with faith. Maybe today, your battle is not against a physical army, but against a sickness, a financial crisis, a family problem, or an inner struggle. But remember this, if God was able to stop the sun and send stones from heaven for a faithful servant, He can also act powerfully in your life. What we need is to have the same bold faith as Joshua, to pray as if there were no limits, to believe as if we had already won, and to march as if God had already given us the victory. Now a question, what is your battle? Are you willing to trust that God is fighting for you? The story of the Battle of Gibeon and the divine intervention is one of the most astonishing accounts in the Bible. But are there any historical or archaeological evidences that confirm this event? What do science and history say about this hailstorm and the day that lasted longer? First of all, we know that the city of Gibeon really existed. Archaeological excavations at the site have confirmed its presence in ancient Canaan, with inscriptions mentioning the name Gibeon found on pottery and historical records. This alone establishes a strong connection between the biblical narrative and historical reality. But what about the battle? Is there any record of such an extraordinary event? Interestingly, some ancient texts outside the Bible refer to an unusual day where the sun seemed to stay in the sky longer. One notable example is the book of Joshua, which is mentioned in the biblical text itself, Joshua 10:13. This book, now lost, apparently contained historical accounts of important events, including this battle. Moreover, records from ancient civilizations such as the Egyptians, the Chinese, and even the Mayans mention a day when the sun appeared to stand still, or a long period of unexpected darkness in another part of the world. Some scholars speculate that these reports may be connected to the same phenomenon described in Joshua. As for the hailstorm, science offers some hypotheses. One possibility is that it was a meteor shower entering the atmosphere at a precise moment. Modern records confirm that meteors can explode in the sky with the force of atomic bombs. If God used such an event to target only Israel's enemies, this would further reinforce the idea of a miracle. Another theory suggests that it could have been a massive hailstorm, which has occurred in various parts of the world. Hailstones the size of baseballs can be deadly. However, the Bible emphasizes that these stones killed more Amorites than the swords of Israel, a detail that goes far beyond a regular storm. But the bigger question is, do science and faith need to be in conflict? The answer is no. Science and archaeology may not have all the answers, but that does not invalidate the truth of the Bible. God can use natural phenomena to accomplish His purposes, or He can act in a completely supernatural way beyond our understanding. In the end, what matters most is not how God did it, but the fact that He did it. The account of the Battle of Gibeon is not just a historical curiosity, it is proof of God's power and His faithfulness to His promises. And that brings us to the final question. What does this story mean for us today? The Battle of Gibeon was not just a military event. It was a moment when God unquestionably demonstrated His power, fighting for those who trusted in Him. The hailstorm, the sun standing still, the victory of a people who, humanly speaking, had no chance. All of this proves an eternal truth. When God decides to act, nothing can stand in His way. But this story is not just about the past. It still speaks to us today. How many times do we feel like the Israelites before the battle, surrounded, pressured, with no way out? How many times does the enemy seem greater than our strength? But this story teaches us that victory does not come from our efforts alone. It comes from God. He fights for us when we trust in Him. He intervenes when everything seems lost. Maybe you are facing a problem that seems impossible to solve. Maybe you feel like you need a miracle, something as extraordinary as hailstones from heaven or the sun standing still on the horizon. But do you have the bold faith of Joshua? Joshua did not just wait for a miracle. He acted. He marched through the night. He raised his sword. And most importantly, he prayed boldly. If there is one lesson this story teaches us, It is that God is not limited by natural laws. He can change any situation. He can turn any defeat into victory. He can hold back time, open impossible paths, and tear down walls that seemed unbreakable. But there is one thing God expects from us: faith and action. Are you praying like Joshua prayed? Are you trusting that God can do the impossible in your life? God still fights for those who trust in Him. He may not stop the sun or send stones from the sky today, but He can open doors where there is no way, provide resources where there is nothing, and restore what seemed lost. This battle is not yours. It belongs to the Lord. Now I want to hear from you. What is your battle today? Do you believe that God still fights for you? Drop your comment below and share your experience. If this message spoke to you, like the video, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Let's spread this message of faith together. And remember, when God steps into the battle, victory is certain.